Hi, friends. Gene Valentino, and welcome back to another episode of Gene Valentino's GrassRoots TruthCast. Each week we have a variety of guests from all walks of life, and you can subscribe and join us on our site at genevalentino.com. Please subscribe. We will push out to you weekly the guest of the week, or the soup du jour, if you will, of various topics: social, political, economic, and religious, faith-based. You pick it, we're doing it, and it varies weekly. My guest this week is Mr. Todd Sheets. He's also from Florida as well, with his own podcast, his Substack newsletter. Todd, welcome aboard.
Gene, it's great to be with you.
Todd, we're going to give you the chance to give a full pitch, not only on your website, your own podcast, but I am really interested in focusing on 2008, What Really Happened, your book. I'd like you to pitch your book. I know it's on Amazon and the other outlets, but I really want you to tell. We can start there, but then let's move into what's going on right now today. I just got the word this morning, $100 a barrel, and the Straits of Hormuz attempting to be cleared by President Trump to reestablish traffic through the Straits of oil supply to the world. We've got a longer story on this between politics, economics, and what Todd's doing to keep you informed right after this.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bianca Della Garza, and you have to check out Gene Valentino's GrassRoots TruthCast podcast. I was a guest. He has the best guests always. Check him out.
It's finally here, our second annual mega sale. This sale only comes around once a year, so take advantage of the best offers ever while you can. For example, save 50% on our Giza Dream bed sheets, as low as $29.98. And for the first time ever on TV, My Pillow mattresses and My Pillow mattress toppers as low as $99.98. And you save 50% on our Lux Pure 6-piece towel sets. Regular $69.98, now only $39.98. And our best-selling standard My Pillows, regular $49.98, on sale for $17.98. Wait on it, mega sale, only $14.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to take advantage of our second annual mega sale. But wait, there's more. To make the mega sale even more special, when you order right now, your order's going to ship absolutely free.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to the GrassRoots TruthCast. We're here with Todd Sheets, the author of a very interesting book, 2008, What Really Happened. Todd, open it up with your book. I'd like to pitch it. What really happened in 2008?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it short here if I get off on a tangent, or just, reel me back in. So,
Okay.
Yeah, so, I wrote the book because even though it had been quite a while, we really didn't have a book out there that explained, as I say in the title, what really happened. And that's critical, because if you don't learn that lesson, you're going to repeat those same mistakes again. And to some extent, we have done that in a slightly different form with the affordability problems we have in housing right now. So let's go back to 2008, and then we can connect those dots if you'd like. The story that came out of 2008, kind of the overriding take on it, was that there was a problem of a gradual trend of deregulation, which went too far and then let the financial system run amok, which caused this problem and was evidence of a need for even greater levels of regulation over the financial system than we had had in the past, or certainly leading up to that period of time. So that led us down the path of very heavy-handed regulation in the financial sector, so on and so forth. When I went back and actually looked at the data, some of which was not available, as all of this was occurring, there's some very good national housing information that came out in the aftermath from a Yale economist. And if you go back and break that down, what you find is that there's a very clear and distinct trend. The housing bubble started in 1998. It then took another leap up in the early 2000s. And then in 2006, housing prices started to come down. And in 2007, they started to collapse, which is what put us into the financial crisis. So once you have that analysis laid out, as I put together in the book, then it's a matter of going in and saying, okay, what lines up with this hard onset, which happened suddenly? And just that alone tells us that the gradual deregulation narrative is unlikely to be true, because if something was happening gradually, we wouldn't have seen this sudden takeoff of housing prices in 1998 or these very distinct turning points afterwards in the early 2000s. And when you go back and look at the analysis that I put in the book, what you'll find is what happened in 1998 was Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. These are the two government-sponsored national housing mortgage companies who by that point in time had amassed nearly, not quite, but almost a 50% share of the market. And that gave them the ability to influence housing prices on a national basis, which had never existed before. So, we were talking earlier about the Substack pieces that I do, the On Wealth and Progress. I've written about in that part, for like 100 years prior to the late 90s, we had what I called the golden age of housing. This was like the cornerstone investment. Everybody starting off in life, almost always your first investment was your home. It became a place to raise a family, but also to build wealth and accumulate net worth and that kind of thing. And it just worked beautifully, and it was widely affordable to everybody from almost all walks of life, as long as you had some kind of a job and a career going. And then all of that started to go kaput with the housing bubble.
Is this a isolated event in your analysis over the years? Let me make a comparison for you. I look today at the economics of what's been happening with tariffs. We have a tariff issue, which is a government policy issue. To me, not an economic incentive issue. It's to me a use of a financial levy of sorts to affect a political outcome in the governances, between governances around the world. Yet the market goes bonkers, thinks the world's coming to the end one day. They're like hyperactive chihuahuas. And then the next day they seem to bounce back. I don't understand what's being economically responded to versus the intent of the tariff as being a political tool. I mean, we're up to $100 a barrel. Gas prices have moved maybe 50 cents a gallon upward. But I don't see a collapse in the economy. Is this an analogy you're trying to relate to? On a broader scale, I see government intervention trying to harness some action, but ineffective in the way it's trying to create economic incentives.
Yeah, well, with respect to the housing bubble, that is exactly what happened. Is we saw this government intervention with the idea that we're going to spread these benefits of home ownership to a larger audience through the government-sponsored enterprises and bring more people into home ownership, and that's what triggered the bubble. And then the Federal Reserve got involved and made it worse. And unfortunately, as so often happens, the people who were most harmed by these well-intentioned but misguided interventions were all the people who could barely afford a home but thought, oh, I've got to get one now because they're going up so fast, it's a no-lose game, just before it all collapsed. That was clearly, another disastrous example of government interventions in the economy gone wrong.
Now, that's your book, the 2008.
That's the 2008. Now, with respect to the tariffs, I think that's a slightly different issue. I wrote when Trump first imposed the tariffs early last year and the market collapsed and everybody jumped on him as a bad idea. I wrote a piece that basically said, take a breath. This is likely to be temporary. We are not going into the Great Depression. And in fact, there are some good rationales for employing tariffs if done correctly. One, and they can fall into two categories. One is to isolate China. So we've got a second Cold War with China that is not unlike the one we had with the Soviet Union, back after World War II, stretching up through the Reagan years when Reagan finally defeated them. The reason that we were able to win that war without firing a bullet, as Margaret Thatcher put it, was because their economy was isolated. And then Reagan played on the dysfunctional nature of that communist socialist economy when he reinvigorated growth here and then pushed up defense spending in a way that they couldn't match. And so today with China, I think Trump is playing a long game of doing those same things.
Could you include Russia in that too?
Yeah, I would. Although he hasn't been quite as aggressive with Russia as I wish that he would have been, for his own reasons. But in Trump 1.0, he raised tariffs on China from effectively around 3 or 4% up to around 17, 18%. Right. That had a big impact on Chinese trade to America. And then this time, if he he'll get through this one way or another. He's roughly going to double those tariffs again. So one thing on the tariffs, which I'm a very big supporter of, is isolating China, because dealing with them economically is far better than having to deal with an adversary like that militarily.
Well, we have, haven't we? I mean, capturing Venezuela and controlling the output of oil from there. Now, a week later, he's got so much backing up and going on in parallel. The issues with Iran. If we end up at the end of the day controlling the Venezuelan oil supply along with Iran, we have got at least 60, 70% of China's oil need stifled or controlled. I think something near that amount applies to Russia as well, which may have been the plan in terms of how he addresses Russia forthcoming in the settlement of this Ukraine-Russia war. Your take on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we have seen the potential. Now, it's not all finished yet, and there's some very tricky things left, but the potential to totally reset the geopolitical order. I mean, if you think back a month or two, China has this huge footprint and presence in Venezuela. That's a key source of oil and energy for them. It is a way for them to try and influence activities throughout Latin America and play a role in keeping an eye on us and using Cuba as well. Same thing with Russia. And now here we are. They've effectively been ejected from Venezuela, and we are in control of Venezuela's oil reserves, second largest oil reserves in the world. And now here we are a few weeks after that, setting Iran significantly back and potentially leading to a change in the regime and potentially giving us the ability to have at least some influence over the control of those oil reserves, which, as you said, you're talking about, somewhere around half of their total, energy, petrochemical needs coming out of that part of the world. So this totally changes the dynamic if we can end up being successful in these two areas in going down that path of isolating China. And you talk about a card to hold over them. If they were to invade Taiwan, and we can shut down their energy supplies like that, this totally changes the table there. So huge event.
I think what people forget is just how patient America has been over the 40 plus years that Iran has been poking the bear, meaning the United States, and how much we've taken on the world scene from other alleged allies, which haven't proven to be such good allies lately. But I read somewhere in your materials about this is the dawn of a whole new world order. What did you mean by that?
Exactly what we're talking about here. Yeah. We have the chance here For the last, as you just mentioned, let's say 40 to 50 years, what started to happen at that point in time, and there's some also domestic implications as well, but let's just stay on the international front for a second. We saw this idea in the Middle East and in South America that if we get rid of American imperialism, we're going to go a different direction. We're going to move down a model towards a more collectivist, socialist, whatever you want to call it, type of economic system. We're going to get rid of the great Satan in Iran. In South America, we're going to throw off America. We're going to embrace communism and socialism and those kinds of things. And there was this starry-eyed idea that this would lead them to a far better economic outcome than what they had previously. And that idea persisted for a long time. And that's important because people think that way and that they have expectations that these things are going to come to fruition. But what we've seen over the last 10 or 15 years is the reality start to set in, the harsh reality of how horrific things became in Venezuela after they went down the democratic socialism model with Chavez, which then became an authoritarian socialism under Maduro. Or we see what happened in Iran, the reality of going under this government-driven collectivist model in Iran. So now the people in these countries, after 50 years of failure, they are ready to move in a different direction. And we see this starting to happen throughout South America, and we see it in the rebellions in Iran. And I think this is one of the things that's caused Trump to be willing, to take these big political risks by making these historic military moves, is because there is a chance to reset everything in both these regions.
Oh, reset it, absolutely. I mean, this is unprecedented, which is why I'm so glad I have you on. Folks, I have Todd Sheets on with us. We're talking about economics. He's an investment banker. We're talking about his book. We're going to repitch all that in a minute. But Todd, missing in this, we almost forget to mention it, but it's right under our nose. We've got Cuba. While we're talking Venezuela and Iran in the context of political regime change and oil supply, we've got Cuba that's been relying on Russia and Venezuela. And now look where Cuba is in a complete collapse. I hate to say it, but instead of all these people flooding into the United States to become illegal citizens, they stay right where they are, and we make them the 51st, 52nd, and 53rd states. They enjoy the privileges of America. They pay taxes like you and me, and we extend the benefits from our homeland here to those regions as well, instead of them feeling the need to rush over the border and take us out in some way. I think it's reverse psychology. But, when you and I were very young, I suspect, the Eisenhower administration was one of two that had the Alaska and Hawaii coming in as the 49th and 50th state. It should not be so foreign a notion that other states join this nation and add an extra star or two or three to our flag so that we can increase not the cultural diversity, yes, but the economic incentives to those regions, that they have disrupted the economic model you were talking about within our states. Housing's a good example. They rush into the nation and they disrupt the housing model, at least the incremental growth in the housing model, because of all this influx. Rather, if they stayed right where they were and we helped incentives in their regions and grow it out, which is less harmful?
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I mean, this opportunity is so huge.
Yeah.
If we can, not just in the Middle East, and it's also the same thing there, but let's just stay focused, as you mentioned, on Latin America for a second. And if they became states, I'd be open to that, but that doesn't even need to go that far. All we need to do is end socialism and communism, get these countries back on a track towards capitalism, so that they can grow and become vibrant countries that can become key trading partners with us that lift their people up. And as you pointed out, once that happens, they don't want to leave their homes.
Yeah.
A small number, maybe a trickle, but most people, they don't want to leave their home and move to some other part of the world unless they are so impoverished that it's the only way for them to have a better life. They'd rather stay with their family and that kind of thing. So, I mean, we'd obviously be happy to welcome a certain number under a well-structured legal immigration model. That'd be fantastic.
Yes, exactly.
But the first step is to create a vibrant, upwardly mobile, dynamic economy in their home countries so that they can start to experience a better life there, and they can become a valuable trading partner of ours, which then also brings them into the military sphere, where they become a geopolitical partner of ours as well. And all of this, we could be on the cusp of all of these kinds of things happening with these moves here.
What would be the identifiable difference, though, between, let's say, the 50s and 60s, post-World War II, where you had a strong buildup of America patriotism, made in America, support from within, and then all of a sudden it disappeared. We all had this desire to farm things out to other nations of the world, which is part of our problem with China, by the way. Tell me what you think about this. We didn't produce locally. Why didn't we produce locally? Unions were ramping up. Prices were soaring. We couldn't keep our cost of goods sold under control. So we went abroad to have it manufactured abroad. Made in China was the tag on everything we could buy. And today, it's the opposite. They're trying to make it say made in America, and there's a little less concerned about the distinction in price. Your take on that shift over the last 50 years?
Yeah, there's a couple of critical points here. We go back to that Eisenhower period you're talking about, where business is booming, manufacturing is booming in the United States. This extended up through the 60s. We were in a post-World War II bubble.
Yeah.
If you think about it, think back to the history books or any other footage you've seen in film or text or wherever, and Europe's infrastructure is leveled and decimated, and the same is true in Japan. And so it took a period of time for them to rebuild. And unfortunately, during that rebuilding period, the unions basically controlled so much of what was happening in manufacturing here. And you had wages that got pushed out of whack.
Out of control, yeah.
Yes, and that's where, you had people making $80 an hour, putting hubcaps on a wheel in Detroit and that kind of thing. And look, I came from a lower middle class family. That is what I still relate to. My dad was a high school football coach and a teacher. He wasn't like a CEO or anything. So I'm all for upward mobility. But if you push it too far, you become uncompetitive. And that's what happened when Europe, and then especially Japan in the late 60s and 70s, came back into the international markets after they had rebuilt with automobiles that were not only much more fuel efficient the last time we had a oil shortage kind of thing, but they also were higher quality and much lower priced. And so that was the first big change in the manufacturing dynamic. And you've touched on the second one also, which came from China. Now that one is misunderstood. China's emergence came from the failure of communism. Communism under Chairman Mao failed so badly that it left a country with over 500 million people living on less than $2 a day. So when Mao died and they were at the point of mass starvation, I don't know if you remember it, but my mom's thing was finish your plate. There's all those starving children in China would love to have, those extra vegetables or something
Yeah.
on their dinner
Same
table.
story in our home. Yes.
Yeah. So that was a reflection of how badly communism was failing. Well, when they finally realized they needed to go another direction after Mao, and they started to move towards capitalism in short steps, well, what that left was hundreds of millions of low-wage workers waiting to get into the world economy if they had an opportunity. And when Russia finally fell in the early 90s, that opened up the door for that to happen. And so that is, if you want to understand the reemergence of China, they have built it on the backs of the impoverished labor that they created in the first place.
And the incentives, and the incentives that were we brought in their direction. There's a lot of the Nixon administration stuff in the early 1970s under détente and his dealing with Mao at the time. I remember us pulling them out of the doldrums. But what we didn't count on is how that relationship took advantage of America's good nature. I want to come back to good nature in a minute, but it seemed that was the beginning of the end. Our benevolence, which was trying to help them get off the ground, which saved their economy and saved their society in a sense through their capital and economic and trade with us, saved them, but it then caused a level of, greed maybe, or now we can take them out because we're stronger. Instead of being the good-natured ally that we would hope they would have become, there was a unspoken or murmurs of a philosophy that they would take out America at some point. Seems to be part of a bigger regime movement. While we fight these battles overseas right now, the real battle is within the United States, Todd. The fight within to keep our American culture, our democracy, our spirit, what's made us so great, assimilating into our culture, not us having to tolerate foreign cultures, seize control of our governance, our way of life. What say you?
Yeah, I think this is a huge thing. And I've talked about this recently in the Substack pieces, and it fits into everything that we're talking about. As we talked about Latin America, the Middle East, going down this collectivist socialist model under the anticipation it would lead to a better life. And here we are 50 years later, they see how disastrous it's become, and they want to move back towards an American Western values-based model with the freedoms and a capitalistic system that can provide upward mobility and help lift these countries from what Adam Smith would have called the lowest level of barbarism to the highest state of opulism. But unfortunately, in the United States, there's been a movement internally going in the opposite direction. This started in the 1960s and 70s with what I now call the far socialist left, who began this agenda, and they had this idea. They wanted to move America and turn it into a socialist country. And what's happened is they've had this long march through the institutions where they effectively took over the thinking in legacy media, eventually the educational system, first the colleges, and then extending down into the high schools and even the elementary level. We've seen it happen now with the Democratic Party. You go back to as recently as the 1990s, Bill Clinton, for all of his issues, he was basically a capitalist. He believed in the system. Yeah. And he did a very good job. He inherited the economy of a lifetime that had been created by Reagan, but he did a good job of managing it in a fiscally prudent way. He made the comment, the era of big government is over, and he helped continue the boom that Reagan started. But since then, they have moved towards this socialist idea, especially in the last 15 years. I think we saw the what has been the peak expression of that under Biden, where they found a guy that looked like an old middle America centrist as a kind of a puppet that they could put up while Elizabeth Warren and AOC and Bernie Sanders and that crowd were effectively running the agenda behind them. So yeah, we have this bizarre situation where the rest of the world wants to come back towards these Western capitalist values, which have proven themselves over the last few centuries. And within, we've got a big part of the Democratic Party and America moving in this socialist direction, which we've seen fail almost everywhere else. So it's now, Reagan was fighting the Soviet Union on the outside. Trump has got to fight not just China, but this internal movement. And I think that's a large reason why he got elected, was there are a lot of people that recognized this was going way too far. We've got to try and create regime change within the country and take us back towards those Western values and a more free market entrepreneurial system to get things working again.
What I was going to say was, I don't understand why we haven't pushed more for regime change when it is, in fact, exactly what they were trying to do to us, is change our regime from within and stifle what's going on. We're talking with Todd Sheets. He's an author of a great book, 2008, What Really Happened. He's an economist. He was with Raymond James setting up a transition strategy during a housing bubble, going back to that period of time. And he's done a lot of thinking, I think I can say, about some of the solutions. I'd like to know the history, and we'll talk more about this after the break, the history behind the people and the institutions that drove many of these events to occur, the wars that we're looking at, the economic bubble that occurred back then, which is the essence of your book, but also what put directors and investors, investment bankers, regulators, policy makers, how do we get all of them to help the new presidents of the United States establish a direction so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past in terms of relation with foreign countries, in terms of economic policy? Two key points right after this.
It's finally here, our second annual mega sale. This sale only comes around once a year, so take advantage of the best offers ever while you can. For example, save 50% on our Giza Dream bed sheets, as low as $29.98. And for the first time ever on TV, MyPillow mattresses and MyPillow mattress toppers, as low as $99.98. And you save 50% on our Lux Pure 6-piece towel sets. Regular $69.98, now only $39.98. And our best-selling standard MyPillows, regular $49.98, on sale for $17.98. Wait on it, mega sale, only $14.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to take advantage of our second annual mega sale. But wait, there's more. To make the mega sale even more special, when you order right now, your order's going to ship absolutely free.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to the GrassRoots TruthCast. And my guest this week, Todd Sheets. He's authoring the book 2008, What Really Happened. But hey, Todd, let me throw the pitch out there for you. You're part of a free weekly Substack newsletter you're pushing out on wealth and progress. Throw it out there. What would you like the folks to do?
Yeah. So what I like to say in the podcast, I do a newsletter and a podcast, and I like to say, I had the good fortune to live the American dream, and this is my way of giving something back. And so if they go to Substack and search On Wealth and Progress with my name, Todd Sheets, they'll find it. They can sign up for free. Or if they'd prefer to get it in like a 10 to 15 minute audio visual format each week, it's basically the same material that's available on the major podcasts. Again, you can search On Wealth and Progress and Todd Sheets, and you'll find it there. So
very good. We left you just before the break with the question, economic direction. What would you advise for an economic policy change? What would you advise entrepreneurs, investment bankers, and people from a political side as well? Give us some insight as to where you think we can go in the future as America to avoid some of the mistakes of the past.
Yeah, so the good news is we've got all kinds of history that lead us in the right direction. The key is just getting back to it. And President Trump is doing a lot of things to get us back there. And that is to get back to as close to a free market, limited government model as we can possibly get. I've gone back and studied this to the beginning of the country. The first 130 years, we had the most limited government model that has ever existed in our or anyone else's history. Government expenditures were consistently around 3 to 4%. We ran balanced budgets or surplus. For most of that, there was no income tax and there was no Federal Reserve. And we had the greatest, most consistent, prolonged period of economic growth in our history. We welcomed more immigrants who were absorbed into the system and became a key part of creating that economic growth than we've ever had. And for anybody that doubts the statistics, we don't even need to go into them. All you need to do is ask yourself, if it wasn't as good as I'm saying, then why would so many tens of millions of people have moved from the farms to the cities voluntarily to participate in it, and from around the world to come here to participate in it, which happened decade after decade as we went from a country of 5 million people to a country of 130 million people. And so that was the best. We went through massive social technological change during that. It handled all of that. And then we did it again in the Reagan years when we got too far away from that. And Reagan came back and reinvigorated that model. And he put us on a 20-year growth spurt. So Trump is moving us back in that direction. It doesn't mean, in my opinion, he's doing everything right, but they've got the big picture right. And I think it's very important that by and large, even if there are things here and there that we disagree with, we keep in mind the big picture of what's going on is he's trying to turn this ship away from these socialist waters that the other party has been trying to steer us in for the last couple of decades and back towards something that works. And I think he needs our support in helping get that done.
I think government's role since the early 1900s has gotten worse, as you said, but it was in the early 1900s. We didn't have an income tax. We were balancing the budget, as you said, off of the tariffs.
Yeah,
the very tariffs that we were talking about earlier, and now. And I know you're a CPA, so instead of having to digest volumes of regulatory information to get through the taxation requirements each year, I find it amazing that the areas of the nation most troubled with the most difficulty are I won't refer to them as Democrat versus Republican. I'll just refer to them as overtaxed regions of the nation where we see a government trying to intervene in a socialistic direction, in a Marxist communistic direction, have all failed. Show me one that's worked. And I, as a former county commissioner myself here in the Panhandle of Florida, we in the Florida, and I think you know this, live off a constitution that mandates that at each of the county levels, the counties must balance a budget. Well, here we are in Florida with no state income tax. We're balancing a budget off of primarily a property tax revenue coming in those regions. And now you have a Governor DeSantis talking about eliminating a property tax as well and moving to some sort of fee-for-service arrangement throughout the nation. Describe those concepts and what it might do to impact the future governance here in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is so critical because the message that gets lost, especially the further and further you move away from it, is the best thing for everybody is a vibrant, dynamic, growing economy that everybody participates in and that lifts everybody up. And that's what we had for that first 130 years when we created the middle class. It is also what Reagan reinvigorated here. And that is far better than any kind of social programs, reallocation of money, all of those kinds of things that you can find. And this lesson, if it was, I've said this many times, if we were back 150, 175 years ago, we might have a very interesting intellectual debate about which system works better. But now, at this point, we have got 250 years of real world evidence that shows it so clearly. And it's true internationally, everywhere it's been tried. Big industrial country like the Soviet Union, communism, socialism failed there. An agricultural country like China, it failed there. Smaller countries like Cuba, Latin America, it failed there. It's failed everywhere it's tried. A less extreme version, like what we see in Europe, in the socialist European countries, they've lost the ability to grow. They can't afford the huge social welfare programs that they've created and that have stifled economic growth. And as you've pointed out, and I'm just going to make this point real quick, it's also happened in the United States. If you look at New York, California, Chicago, these were the economically favored regions of the country. New York's the financial capital of the world. Chicago, the industrial capital of the Midwest. California, they've got Hollywood and technology, these vibrant industries, and yet these failed policies have choked off the growth and caused these massive problems even in those regions. And that's the lesson that people need to understand. And I think they are.
Yeah, and that lesson, Todd, is what's concerning me. Have we learned our lesson? I mean, what drove 5 million, primarily Democrats, and many of them Jewish, from Jewish faith, to get behind a socialist communist Mamdani? I don't see how they think government doing for them is better than them doing for themselves. Do you really look forward to going to a government-sponsored grocery store and expect the supply to be on the shelves? Do you remember before the collapse of Russia, their government-fed grocery stores throughout the nation? It was a complete collapse.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm thinking of, this is slightly off the grocery store analogy, but Ronald Reagan used to have an old joke about the guy who waits in line for months and months and months and finally gets to the head of the line, to change the address on, he had just moved or something like that. And then he's also it's the same place. And they say, well, you're going to have to come back next, in 4 months, we've got an opening for you. This is just the line to get the appointment. And so the guy slaps himself on the head, and the guy behind the desk who's trying to help him says, well, what's the problem? And he goes, oh, that's the month the plumber's going to finally come to my house. So,
yeah, I remember the same concern. I remember bumping into, I was running for office as a Republican conservative, and I was in a building owned by a big law firm, which were much more liberal, left-leaning. And the owner of the law firm, the principal, comes into the elevator at the same moment I'm there, and he's leaning up against the wall in the elevator. He puts his hand to his head, and I said, Fred, what's wrong? He says, I don't know, Gene. He says, I can't figure out how we've survived as a nation for so long. He then went on to describe a story which had a socialistic bent to it and government funding of stuff that people should be paying for themselves. This is a real great conversation. Todd Sheets from Florida, his book 2008. 2008. What actually happened? And I think, where can they get this book, Todd?
Yeah, the best thing is just go to Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, one of those places, and buy it online. It's cheaper there. It gets to the house quicker. That's the easiest thing by far. So,
and what's the main theme of the book, which ties into what we're talking about?
Yeah, the main theme is, as you touched on it earlier, is we had housing markets that had worked beautifully for a century, and then the government got too involved, first through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the government-sponsored housing enterprises, and then the Federal Reserve, and it created this bubble which blew up, and it hurt all the people that, in effect, they were trying to help when they started these programs in the first place.
Yeah, I remember CETA, Comprehensive Education Training Act, and a few of the other government-sponsored initiatives to try to help people went nowhere. How about that daycare operation up in Minnesota right now? Huh? That's pretty vibrant. That's got a lot of legs.
Yeah, it's got, you know what? I'm hoping one of my big disappointments in the Trump administration, it's not with Trump, it's not his fault, but, I was so hopeful that Elon Musk and Doge were going to be able to come in and find, this $500 billion to $2 trillion worth of wealth, waste, fraud, and abuse, which everybody knows is out there. The Government Accountability Office itself has said there's at least $500 or $600 billion of this stuff out there. But unfortunately, the left attacked him so hard, and they're setting his dealerships on fire. And if they see a Tesla in a parking lot, they're running a key along the side. And he had to leave that behind before it could realize its potential. I'm hoping, that if there's a silver lining in what happened in Minnesota, it's that it's going to reinvigorate Doge from a bottom-up perspective, and people will start getting after it.
Yeah, I think Elon opened Pandora's box, and he was expecting to find a few worms and bugs. Rattlesnakes came flying out all over the place. The man uncovered so much, he slammed the box shut and said, let me go back and protect my burning dealerships and the abuse that we're taking individually. And that's sad. There's a guy who not only builds the technology for vehicles, but the solar system, the energy system for homes. And while he's doing all that, he's saving people in outer space. I don't think it's fair that the way we as Americans treated him. I think there is a cultural renaissance or an indoctrination that's occurred from within this nation from foreign adversaries that has somehow impacted the culture of America. I pray that we rely on the background of information you bring out in your book and your weekly Substack news articles to remind us of what made us great and what we have to do to stay on the right track. If we are the leaders of the world, we've got to fix it first. A lot of nations that we forget about look up to us, whether they should be or not. They're looking up to us as a direction, as a light, as the lighthouse with a guiding light to guide us into port, if you will. Todd, I'm concerned about how we as a nation go forward from here. Can America understand that the overseas issues that we're fighting, Venezuela yesterday, Iran with Israel today, who knows? Greenland tomorrow, Cuba tomorrow. I don't know. Pick a flavor. But the world seems to be at our doorstep, looking for us to provide a solution. That doesn't mean we have to be a socialistic society. That doesn't mean that government must hand the people within its governance the life to lead. It's caused so many problems elsewhere. Can we help other nations and still promote individuality, independence, and what I'd call democracy?
What I would say is that's the only way we can help other nations. If we go down this socialist communist model that everybody else has tried and is now failing and suffering so severely from, we will end up just like them.
But we saw that happen in New York. They were failing, and they did what? They brought in a true socialist that was revered. When do they learn? Do things have to get worse before they get better?
I think they have to get better before they get better. People have to see the model work again. And unfortunately, this goes back to something we talked about earlier. We talked about the socialist left taking over these different institutions and including the educational system. And unfortunately now, we've got a generation of kids who've grown up at school where either overtly or covertly, and I don't mean there's like a hidden mission to do this, but you read the history books, they don't teach what really happened. They're teaching a socialist agenda. That period I was talking about, the first 130 years of this country, where low-income people were moving from the farms to work in the factories because it offered them a better life, and millions of people were pouring into our borders to work here. They've turned that around. And I'm not saying there weren't periods of exploitation or things that weren't bad. Of course there were. There always are when you're struggling to try and achieve a better life. But they've turned that around into this period of exploitation and subjugation and the need for government to come in and play a bigger role to make it better and more fair. But that's not what's happened. And that's what they're teaching kids in the school systems. They teach them if there's a problem out there, it's because of capitalism. It's failed. And so these kids go through that, through high school, through 4 years of college, and they come out, and all of a sudden, in many cases, they have a degree that cannot pay for itself. They cannot afford the lifestyle that they have been told they are entitled to for having been born in America. Well, nobody's entitled to it. You have to earn it, even if you're born here. And then things aren't working the way they want it. And they've been taught if it's not working, it's because of capitalism. And that's what happens when you have the educational system that becomes controlled by a single party and a single vision, and it's a dysfunctional vision. And that's what we have to overcome. That's what all these other countries who now want to turn around and come back towards Western values of freedom and capitalism learned over the last 50 years. And hopefully we can learn that lesson before we go as far down the rat hole as so many of these other countries did.
You talk so much about the crisis in 2008, the housing collapse and so forth. But to me, that is a consequence of everything you just described. What you're describing is a way for America to recover itself. And you can only do that in a constitutional republic under the masking of a democracy for that to occur. I think that what's really happening now is that other nations of the world see it. But the question I really have is, you have what's the educational system doing? I remember Ms. Lovejoy in middle school made me read this Constitution, and if you expected to pass this class, you had to memorize the preamble and a few other parts of our Declaration of Independence and Constitution. And it really, I don't even know if they know what the Constitution is these days. To me, I think there's been a shift in feel-good mentality being more important than learning mentality. I think that we've come to a point where we've got to get back on track with the disciplines, and that's why the military is so important. We're winning in the world scene as a consequence of military disciplines that have never been compromised, especially with the technology advances we're we're holding dear these days. We've come to realize that. Is the Gen Z crowd in your travels stepping up to acknowledge the concerns post-World War II and up to 2008 that you mentioned? Are they seeing the change? Are they saying, well, I didn't understand that before, but I do now? The Charlie Kirks of the world.
I think some are, and that's critical. And, I'll go back to what you said about the military. I mean, my girlfriend's oldest son went into the military after college recently. This past summer, he graduated from boot camp. We went up to visit it. And I have to tell you, that was one of the most moving ceremonies and weekends that I have been around for a long time.
Wow.
And all I could think about was the contrast between that and what so many kids are learning in colleges, where they go out and they pay these enormous sums of money. They get, encouraged to go down and have, a curriculum that leads to a career that often can't pay for it. They get taught all these dysfunctional things, to hate America, lack of discipline, not working hard, all these kinds of things that you're talking about. And here I saw this incredibly widely diverse group of people, this incredible level of discipline and patriotism. When you stopped, we got lost a couple times on the base. We were trying to visit different things. This was out in Lawton, Oklahoma. And these kids were so polite. And I can remember we started to pull into the base at one point. I wanted to ask to go to a certain place. And Patricia's son wasn't with us. And the guy said, if you can do a U-turn, go right over there. And I can't help you here because there's a line, but I'll come over. And he came over and spent a couple of minutes making sure that we knew the directions to get where we wanted. And it was just, these kids, they were proud. The families were proud. They were proud of the accomplishment of the kids, of the way they had bonded together, and of their country. And so, as you're saying this, those institutions haven't failed. And we need to get back towards helping kids. Look, we need to see the mistakes the country's made. This isn't about hiding those things. We did make big mistakes throughout the history of the country. We did need to open this up and make it available towards more people from more walks of life and make them feel welcome and a part of the system. All that needed to happen. But we need to keep in mind that as we do that, we can't lose sight of the fact that the Western values that this country were built upon, and the economic model that created all of this opportunity and these freedoms, including the freedoms to point out our failings, is the greatest thing that's happened in the history of the world. And we should all be proud of that. And we should all be working along the things that have been proven that work to help us move forward. And that's what these kids need to start learning in the educational system as well.
You're bringing up so many good points. We're in the 250th year of the celebration of this democracy, the longest standing governance in the world. And I think a lot of it is self-deprecation, our ability to criticize ourselves and correct ourselves, which other nations don't tolerate as well or at all. And I think what's happened is that the only concern with that point, which ties into what you just said, is that I'm not sure that the Gen Z crowd and younger are positioned to understand American history. The Jews had a favorite line after the Holocaust: "Don't ever forget. Keep telling the story. Don't forget, don't forget, don't forget." We're forgetting, as Americans, some of the proud history we have, which the patriotic Donald Trump is running down everyone's throats, whether you like it or not. I think it drives them nuts, but it's true. We're Americans and we should be proud of that. I don't plan to assimilate into anyone else's culture here in my homeland. I'll behave well when I'm a guest in your home in France, Italy, or anywhere else in the world. But when you're in my home, don't put your muddy feet up on my table and expect me to tolerate that. And that's what's happening right now with the guests that have come into this country that think they can own us. I can get more political and say it has to do with the illegal immigrants coming in as a result of a border that was trampled upon, resulting in some 20 million people from around the world entering the United States illegally. But they want what we have, so why don't you just stay where you are and we'll help you live better there and make you the 51st state instead of worrying about trampling into the United States with child trafficking, pornography, fentanyl, and all the other ills that have come into this nation. Let's create economy. Since many people work well off greed, and greed is a good motivator, let's create greediness, healthy greediness in your own backyard, and maybe we'll come visit you instead. What say you about that thought, that kind of thinking?
Yeah, look, I think it's very important. I mean, creating economic growth is the key. If we create economic growth here, if we can get that going again, which we have not had for the last couple of decades as we've moved down this path towards the wrong type of policies, but if we get that going again, there will be so much job creation that we will need more people from abroad, and we can expand the legal immigration so that, people who are willing to go through the processes and the vetting that should take place, they can come here, and we want them to come here because they'll participate and help us build this. Again, going back to what happened in the early part of the country, we brought in something like 30 or 40 million people on top of a population base of like 50 million in the latter part of the 18th century. That was enormous levels, but they came here to work. And they came here to help build America, which they did. And as they did so, they became ingrained in the system. And that's what we need to do again, is create jobs and economic growth so that there is the people who are already here start participating in the system in the way that they haven't had to for a couple of decades now. And then once that gets going, and there's even more job creation taking place, there's an opportunity for other people to come here legally as well. And like you said, and at the same time, we're creating the model for the rest of South America, Latin America, to start growing internally as well. And then people are their boats at home are being lifted up. And look, there's an old saying, we were talking about trade in the 60s and manufacturing. There was an old saying that was, as goes General Motors, so goes the country. Well, we can step back from that and we can say, and this is true, as goes America, so goes the world. And if
then would you not agree? Then would you not agree that maybe it's not so far-fetched to think that as we in the 40s and 50s brought Alaska and Hawaii on, that maybe in the next decades ahead, we see the absorption of other regions of the world becoming part of the United States of the world, statehoods being countries absorbed into the governance of the United States. If you want our riches and you want our way of life, we acquire your country to become a statehood in the structure of the United States government and work within that statehood to enjoy the funding and the incentives and the liberties and freedoms and the protections that we offer not only to the United States, but to the rest of the world. I'm saying don't fight and come in, become an ally, become a state, become part of us. Now, I know there's some give and take on these issues, but I mean, are we willing to open our minds up to a different thought pattern, a paradigm shift that addresses some of the 21st century issues: internet, cellular phone usage, AI. We had a highway system in the 40s and 50s that was built through the automotive industry, taking the lead. Now we have a data information web-based systems, which is a highway unto itself that is instantaneous and around the world. Look at you and I. We're having a conversation on a podcast from one end of the state to another that goes worldwide. And we couldn't even talk about doing this 10, 15 years ago. Look at where we are today, sharing information in this method through this modality that so why couldn't we consider doing something with absorption of nations around the world and creating other states to giving them the liberties and freedoms they beg for?
Yeah, look, I think it's a very reasonable thing. And I mean, I think probably important to point out, we're talking about this thing happening voluntarily. It's not like we need to. This is one of the great things, and this was something I talked about in a recent Substack this past weekend, is one of the underappreciated benefits of this historically unique economic growth that was triggered by capitalism and the limited government model is that it did away with the need to take over other territories to try and grow. You know, almost all of human history before America was one of conquest. You know, the history of Europe was France was fighting with Germany and Germany was fighting with England. And you go, right. And it wasn't just Europe. That's true in Asia. It's true in Japan. It's true in Africa, wherever you go. But when capitalism took place, there was so much growth happening within that, although early on there was some of that, but after that ended, by the late 1800s, the early 1900s, that was over, and we were growing so fast, we didn't need to take over other territories. In fact, we were able to go support Europe in World War I and World War II without any expectation of territorial gain. I mean, you talk about exceptionalism, that's about as exceptional as it gets. And so if we can create that growth again, we don't need to take over other territory in order to expand it, because as you're talking about, this is because of the knowledge industry or the improvement of, you know, the assembly line like Henry Ford created, which brought along that automotive world that changed the world so much. You know, these are ideas that create the growth, not territorial conquest. And so could that open up to other countries that, you know, they almost come to us and say, hey, we want to become a state so that we we can benefit from what you're benefiting. Absolutely, that could happen.
Well, the only concern with not necessarily worrying about taking them over wasn't the tone. What it is giving them the opportunity to enjoy freedoms and liberties and lifestyles and economic opportunity the way we do.
Yeah.
They don't now, because in the problematic areas, they are socialistic, Marxist or communistic environments. Look at who we're fighting: Venezuela, Iran. We're not fighting Greenland. We just made them an offer. Can we buy your block of ice up there? So they're 25 of them are grappling over it now. They'll all be millionaires when we do. But the fact is, Cuba in our backyard and others are controlled environments, and they resist not having the ability to enjoy economic freedom like you and me. Maybe you're right. Maybe we don't have to control them and own them, but they can't be socialistic and communistic in order for that expression of benevolence to survive. Because what happens? The communist, the socialist, takes over all that money. Do you remember Barack Obama dropping $1.something billion of hard cash in pallets somewhere in Tehran, Iran, several years ago? Where'd that get us? The rich got richer, the poor got poorer, and they were funding their own regimes to kill more people and to prevent and to destroy democracy. They were biting the hand that was feeding them. And this nice distant arm's length thing didn't work for people so genetically wired to hate us. So there's some thinking that's unconventional for most Americans. We don't believe in that kind of thought. We believe in a more amenable way of relationship-based communities. But some of them aren't wired that way. They're wired to kill you and me and to take us over. And what do we do there? That's what we're seeing right now in Iran. While they've fallen or are about to collapse, they're still talking about killing us. So my point is, there might be a point in time where we come in and take them over and then hand it back to them when they're ready, or at the very least letting it become a state of the United States so we have more direct oversight in being able to make sure they stay on the right path for their own governance. That's all I'm saying. Todd, we are totally out of time. It ran over, but I'm glad it did. Folks, we're talking with Todd Sheets, an author of 2008, What Really Happened. He's got a Substack newsletter going out each week, and he's a CPA. He's an entrepreneur. He's been involved in venture capital initiatives, and he's really quite the pitch your website and your weekly Substack.
Yeah. So the website is toddsheetswriter.com, WRITER. The Substack is On Wealth and Progress. You can find it from the website, or you can go to Substack and search for my name plus On Wealth and Progress, or you can go to one of the major podcast services and find it there.
Or come to genevalentino.com and become a subscriber as where you'll find this episode under the GrassRoots TruthCast, a gallery of podcasts. And we'll make sure, if you're trying to reach Todd, that you get to him if you didn't find his connection directly anyway. Todd, I want to thank you for joining me today.
Gene, it was great to be with you.
Yeah, it's great, and I'd like to have you back again so we can delve into this. Todd's got a great grip on some of the moving and changing dynamics of what's going on throughout the world and how it affects our economy and our way of life here at home. And I want to thank you, the viewers, the patrons, the subscribers, for watching us on this episode of Gene Valentino's GrassRoots TruthCast. See you again soon.
It's finally here, our second annual mega sale. This sale only comes around once a year, so take advantage of the best offers ever while you can. For example, save 50% on our Giza Dream bed sheets, as low as $29.98. And for the first time ever on TV, MyPillow mattresses and MyPillow mattress toppers, as low as $99.98. And you save 50% on our Lux Pure 6-piece towel sets, regular $69.98. Now only $39.98. And our best-selling standard MyPillows, regular $49.98, on sale for $17.98. Wait on it, mega sale, only $14.98. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to take advantage of our second annual mega sale. But wait, there's more. To make the mega sale even more special, when you order right now, your order's going to ship absolutely free.